I never thought a single step would change my life forever. My name is Annora, and this is the story of how one moment of curiosity spiraled into chaos I never imagined. The creek that sunny afternoon sparkled in the light, the air crisp with the scent of wild flowers and fresh grass. I often took walks here to clear my head, to escape the deafening silence of my home and the loneliness that had taken root in my heart. But that day I crossed a line I didn't even realize existed. As I walked along the path, something unusual caught my eye. A majestic chestnut horse grazing in the nearby pasture. Its coat gleamed under the sunlight, every muscle rippling with quiet strength. There was something magnetic about it, a calm and inviting presence that drew me closer, like an unspoken promise of escape. Before I knew it, my feet carried me toward the wooden fence that separated us. The horse lifted its head as I approached, its intelligent eyes meeting mine. I hesitated, but its calm demeanor put me at ease. Without thinking, I climbed over the fence, my shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth on the other side. It didn't shy away as I walked closer. Instead, it stood perfectly still, its ears twitching slightly, as if it were waiting for me. I reached out, my fingers brushing against its warm, velvety coat, marveling at its size and strength. It was the first time I'd been this close to a horse, and I was struck by its power and grace. Yet, beneath its formidable exterior, there was a gentleness that drew me in even further. My hand moved instinctively, running along its side, feeling the smoothness of its coat. It seemed to enjoy the attention, letting out a soft snort of contentment that made me smile. And then, something shifted. I was simply feeling. The texture of its coat under my fingers was smooth, its warmth almost comforting. I couldn't explain why I felt such a pull toward this moment, why my curiosity swelled to the point of recklessness. But there I was, my breath quickening as I crouched lower, my eyes locking onto the unfamiliar anatomy before me. It felt wrong, but at the same time, something about it felt inexplicably intriguing. I hesitated, my hand hovering inches away. Every logical thought in my head screamed for me to stop, to walk away before I crossed a boundary I could never return from. But the stillness of the moment, the quiet invitation in the horse's calm demeanor, held me captive. Slowly, my fingers moved forward, brushing against the surface. It was warmer than I expected, and beneath the smooth exterior was a firmness that made my heart race. I couldn't look away. My breaths came shallow and fast as I let my hand linger, feeling the pulse of something alive, something far beyond my comprehension. As I continued to explore with trembling fingers, I noticed a change, a subtle shift in texture and temperature, as if the very thing I touched was responding to me. What was I doing? The thought barely registered over the pounding of my heartbeat, yet I stayed, drawn further into this forbidden moment. My hand moved lower, curiosity overtaking caution, and I found myself touching something softer, something that felt impossibly wrong and yet ignited an unspoken thrill. The horse let out a soft whinny, its head tossing slightly, and I froze. For a fleeting second, I thought it would pull away, break the spell of whatever madness had gripped me, but it stayed. And then I saw it. A thick, clear fluid beginning to emerge, dripping down slowly, catching the sunlight in a way that made it glisten like honey. I stared, transfixed, as the droplets fell onto the earth below, forming a small, sticky puddle. My mind raced, torn between the undeniable wrongness of what I was doing and the overwhelming pull to keep going. My breath hitched as I reached out again, my fingers brushing against the source of the fluid. The sensation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Warm, sticky, and alive. My heart thundered in my chest, my skin prickling with heat that had nothing to do with the summer sun. Suddenly, the horse shifted, its body trembling slightly as it emitted a deep, guttural sound. I stepped back, startled, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The world around me seemed to tilt, the weight of my actions crashing down like a tidal wave. What was I doing? How had I let myself spiral so far? And then, before I could process what was happening, a voice shattered the fragile bubble I had created. "Annora, what the hell are you doing?" I whipped around, my stomach dropping as I saw Gideon standing at the fence, his face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and fury. His voice echoed through the still air, louder than I'd ever heard him before. The anger in his tone was palpable, cutting through me like a knife. I stumbled backward, my hands flying to my chest as if to shield myself from his gaze. My breath caught in my throat, panic seizing me as I tried to form words, any words, to explain the unexplainable. "Gideon," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. This isn't—" He climbed over the fence, his movements quick and forceful, his eyes blazing as he approached. "What the hell did I just see, Annora? Are you out of your goddamned mind?" And tears welled up in my eyes, shame and fear crashing over me like a wave. "It's not what it looks like," I choked out, even though I knew it was a lie. There was no other way to interpret what he had witnessed, no explanation that could undo what had been done. "Not what it looks like," he repeated, his voice shaking with anger. "What could it possibly be, Annora? How could you do this?" I dropped to my knees, the weight of his words crushing me. My chest heaved as I sobbed, my hands clawing at the ground in desperation. "I don't know," I cried. "I don't know what I was thinking. Please, Gideon, But he cut me off, his voice breaking as he turned away. "I can't even look at you right now. I don't know who you are anymore." He stormed off, his footsteps heavy against the earth, leaving me alone in the pasture with the horse that had unknowingly become the catalyst for my undoing. I stayed there for what felt like hours, my body shaking with sobs, my mind replaying the moment over and over again. How had I let it come to this? How had I let my loneliness and curiosity spiral so far out of control? When the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the field, I finally forced myself to stand. My legs were weak, my body trembling as I made my way home. The house felt cold, empty, as if Gideon's departure had sucked all the warmth from its walls. The house felt unfamiliar, a hollow shell of what it once was. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, replaying Gideon's expression over and over in my mind. The disgust, the disbelief. It cut deeper than I thought possible. I wanted to scream, to claw at the walls, to do anything that would wake me from this nightmare. But no matter how much I wished for it, I couldn't escape what I'd done. Gideon didn't come home that night. The hours dragged on, the silence suffocating. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, made me flinch. I imagined him somewhere else, pacing, fuming, unable to look me in the eye. Would he leave for good? Would he tell someone? The thought made my stomach churn. The next morning I woke to the sound of the front door slamming. My heart leapt into my throat as I rushed downstairs, hoping, praying, that Gideon had come back to talk. Instead, I found him standing in the living room, his arms crossed, his face a mask of anger. "Annora," he said coldly, his voice devoid of any warmth, "we need to talk." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know," I whispered, my voice cracking. He didn't sit down, he didn't even move. He just stood there, his eyes boring into mine, making me feel smaller than I ever had before. "What happened yesterday," he began, his words slow and deliberate, "was beyond anything I could have imagined. I don't even know where to start." I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a hand to stop me. "No," he snapped. "You don't get to talk right now. I need to know—" What the hell were you thinking? Tears welled up in my eyes as I tried to find the words, but nothing seemed adequate. I wasn't, I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't thinking, Gideon. I don't know what came over me. Don't, he interrupted, his voice rising. Don't give me that. You don't just do something like that without thinking. There had to be a reason, Annora. There had to be something. I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. I was lonely, I confessed, my voice trembling. You're never here, Gideon. You're always working, always somewhere else, and My voice broke as the tears spilled over. I just felt lost. He stared at me, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Lost? He repeated, his tone incredulous. So your solution was this, to do something so disgusting, so unforgivable? I know it was wrong, I sobbed. I know, Gideon, and I hate myself for it. I can't explain why it happened, but I swear to you, it'll never happen again. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You think that makes it better? You think that erases what I saw? Annora, I don't even know who you are anymore. Those words hit me harder than anything else he could have said. I felt the weight of them settle on my chest, crushing the air out of my lungs. Please, Gideon, I begged, stepping closer. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Therapy, counseling, anything, just don't give up on us. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his shoulders heaving with the weight of his anger. I don't know if I can, he admitted, his voice cracking. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, frozen, as he grabbed his keys and walked out the door without another word. The sound of his car starting and driving away felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. In the days that followed, I threw myself into therapy. I needed to understand why I had done what I did, why I had allowed my loneliness and curiosity to spiral so far out of control. Each session peeled back another layer of my psyche, exposing the cracks I had tried so hard to ignore. My need for connection, my craving for attention, my desperate desire to feel seen, all of it had built up over years of neglect and isolation, culminating in that one catastrophic moment. Gideon, meanwhile, stayed away. He moved into a hotel, refusing to take my calls or respond to my messages. The house felt emptier than ever, every room a painful reminder of what I had lost. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I spent my days pacing the floors, replaying that moment over and over in my mind, wishing I could go back and undo it all. Then, one night, the doorbell rang. My heart leapt as I rushed to answer it, hoping against hope that it was Gideon. And it was. He stood on the porch, his expression unreadable, a suitcase at his feet. I'm here to talk, he said simply. I stepped aside, my hands trembling as I gestured for him to come in. Gideon walked past me, his shoulders stiff, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He set his suitcase by the door but didn't sit down, keeping his distance as if being too close to me was unbearable. I stayed rooted in place, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to break whatever fragile truce had brought him back here. Annora, he began, his voice steady but cold. I've spent the past week trying to figure out how to process what I saw, trying to figure out if I can even be in the same room as you without feeling disgusted. His words sliced through me, sharp and unrelenting. I swallowed hard, nodding slightly, bracing myself for the inevitable. But, he continued, I also can't stop thinking about the years we've spent together, about the woman I married, the woman who raised my son. And I keep asking myself, was that all a lie? Or is this, whatever this is, some twisted anomaly? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a liar, that I was still the woman he married, that this one terrible mistake didn't erase everything else. but I didn't know if I believed it myself. "I'm not here to forgive you," he said, his tone softening, but still firm. "Not yet. I don't even know if I can. But I am here to try to understand." Tears blurred my vision as I nodded again. "I'll tell you everything," I whispered. "I'll answer any question you have. Just don't walk away." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Why, Annora? That's the only question I have. Why?" A silence that followed was unbearable, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I felt invisible," I admitted, my voice shaking. "For years, I felt like I was fading into the background of your life. You were always working, always distracted, and I let that loneliness consume me. I let it twist me into someone I don't even recognize anymore." Gideon's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he processed my words. "So, what? You thought this thing would make you feel better? Make you feel seen?" "No," I cried, my voice breaking. "I wasn't thinking at all, Gideon. I was lost. I was desperate. And I hate myself for it. Every second of every day, I hate myself for what I've done to you, to us." He looked away, his chest rising and falling with deep, measured breaths. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost tired. "I don't know if I can ever move past this, Annora. I don't know if we can." My heart sank, but I forced myself to hold on to the sliver of hope his words offered. "But you're here," I said softly, stepping closer. "You're here, and that means something. It means you're willing to try." He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the floor. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, until finally he looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "I'll stay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But only if you promise me one thing." "Anything," I said without hesitation. "You need to keep going to therapy," he said firmly. "And we need to do it together. If we're going to have any chance of moving forward, we need to face this head on. No secrets, no lies, and no more mistakes." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I promise," I whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Gideon and I began couples therapy, digging into the deep cracks in our relationship that had led us to this breaking point. It was raw, painful work, but it was also necessary. For the first time in years, we were truly talking about our fears, our insecurities, and the ways we had failed each other. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. Gideon moved back into the house, though the distance between us lingered like a ghost. There were nights when I would catch him staring at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else I couldn't name. But there were also moments of connection, small fleeting glimpses of the love we once shared. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Gideon reached for my hand. "I'm still angry," he said quietly. "I don't know when or if that will ever go away, but I also know I don't want to lose you." I squeezed his hand, my heart aching with gratitude and regret. "You won't," I promised. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you." As the months turned into years, the wounds began to heal. They didn't disappear entirely, but they became scars, visible reminders of the mistakes we had made and the strength it took to overcome them. Gideon and I found a new rhythm, one built on honesty and mutual effort. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope, not just for our marriage, but for myself. I had faced my darkest moment, and though the journey was far from over, I knew I was stronger for it. This is my story, a story of failure, redemption, and the power of forgiveness. It's not an easy story to tell, but it's one I hope can remind others that even in our lowest moments, there is always a way forward.